So in part 2 of chapter 1, we're going to take a look at math operations and formatting our output. So in most languages, almost all of the languages, we will use the same arithmetic operators that you would in your basic algebra class. And all computers follow the same idea of PEMDAS. So the idea that it will follow order of operation as it relates to the operators. So the idea of precedence is still important in writing our programs. So the symbols that we use the caret key like you would on a regular scientific calculator. The caret key is used for exponents. So you can see that 5 caret key 3, that will execute as doing the math of 5 times 5 times 5. Multiplication is the asterisk. So this is important to understand moving forward. You know, in algebra, we use the times sign. We got away from using the times sign, and then we just wrote SF. But in computer science, we use the asterisk to show multiplication. But what you also need to understand is that in algebra, you were allowed to write 5h, which meant 5 times h. But you need to remember, a computer doesn't know anything unless you tell it what to do. So you can't do that. You actually have to put the times sign between the two terms in order to show the multiplication. The same would be if you had parentheses. So if I had, let's say, the sum of something that I wanted to multiply by another number, I would need to use the asterisk in the statement to do that. Remember the idea of PEMDAS, so it would do the parentheses first by adding the 2, and then it would multiply it by the 5. So the computer already knows how to do that. This is an actual executing statement. Division would be the front slash. That would give me a decimal result. That's not always true, but it will be for basic. Addition is the plus sign, and the subtraction sign would be the hyphen. Something to add about the plus sign. The plus sign can be used with our strings, those literals that I mentioned in our last presentation. So I actually can append together the idea of letters and or characters. And so I could actually tell it to append a plus above and give me the word above. It doesn't actually add them together mathematically, but it appends them together. So these are the basic operators that we will use to construct mathematical expressions in computer science. So formatting. So we're going to talk about in this lesson, how do I create a specific layout in my program so that we can have a more pleasing output. So 2 things, and this is the use of syntax. So we have the comma. The comma will give us these preset zones. And so it will create for us, starting at column 1 of the output, these preset zones of 14 columns. So we have column 1 through column 14 in zone 1, column 15 to column 28. So this is zone 2, this is zone 1, and zone 3. And we won't see much beyond that, really, 29 to 42. So it creates these preset zones so that if I put a comma in an output statement, it will move the cursor over to the next zone. Okay, so it allows, this is great for creating columns. This is great for creating columns and tables. The semicolon, what that will do is it puts no spaces between printed literals. Okay, so it will allow me, so again, I could tell it to print Okay, the A, and if I put, like in the previous example where I used the plus sign, this will give me the word above abutted against each other. Okay, now an interesting thing to note though is if I tell it to print 2, the constant 2, which is numerical, and the constant 5, so I'm printing these specifically the constant value, not the character value, it will put a space between the two. There is a difference between me printing 2, the character, and 2, the constant, the numerical value. We will see the behavior is different in the basic language. So let's take a look at an example. So here's a program which is demonstrating the use of commas. And so again, we have our 3 or 4 executing lines of code that are going to be ignored by the system, but here we're going to print out. So here's where the columns will be created. So it will print child, but then what it's going to do is it's going to move to the next zone. The comma says to move to the next zone when it's outside of the quotation marks. And then it's going to print the word kind, and it's going to move to the next zone. So remember that idea of 1 through 14. So under column 1, it's going to print C for child, under column 2, the H, and so on. And then in column 15, it's going to print the K of kind in the next zone. And then in the next zone from there, it's going to print H in that 29. And then this one, if we look at line 60, allows for the underline of each of these. So it gives me that appearance of an underline. Each time that we're put, that there's nothing here at the end, and I move to the next line number, it's going to give me a new line of code. So then this one's going to print Casey. Casey is a girl. And 9 to the screen. Now, this is using the constant type, and therefore it's going to print 9 under column 30, not under column 29 of the A. All right, so there will be a difference. If I put a quotation mark around it, it's going to treat it a little differently. What it's doing is it's allowing space for the possibility, like this one has a minus sign in it, it's leaving that space for the minus sign in there. So what does that layout look like? So here you can see that layout. Our zones started here. Okay, so it makes a really nice, well left justified alignment for the sake of columns. Now they are only 14 characters wide, so if my word extends past those 14 columns, it actually gives us a really funky output, and we'll take a look at that in the lab. But take a notice here, there's that empty space for the possibility of the plus or minus, because I printed them as constant values. And so the plus or minus, now the font does this because of being an actual word editor in PowerPoint. That space, that minus sign actually falls in that blank space. The dot, the decimal falls under this column with all the numbers, the 9, 7, 4, and 2, and then the 2, 5 will follow from there. So those are the basics of formatting our output.